attention for you, because one thing that I'll pick up during the classroom strategies that children with autism are visual learners. They like to see kind of a focus for each lesson will really help, and I'll come on to visuals at a later date. So the idea of tonight and the next session is to support staff to have an increased awareness of the needs of autistic learners at Braes High School and be able to identify appropriate ways of supporting them in their classes. Okay? So I've just come up with a little definition of autism, and it's worth explaining that this is my interpretation of autism, and it forms a kind of neurodiverse approach, where I see high-functioning autistic young people, that is the young people that we see in Braes High School, as having a learning difference, not a disability. That's not to say that people at other ends of the spectrum who face real serious challenges in terms of not being able to speak, etc., that might be a different thing. But for the young people we see here in Braes High School, I would like to be calling that a difference, not a disability. The reason for that is I would argue that all our brains work differently, and by seeing autism as a learning difference, this helps to reduce stigma for our learners. So I've got a lifelong neurodevelopmental difference of communication, socialisation and flexibility in thinking and behaviour, which involves a different way of processing information and seeing the world. They're all very unique. You'll have autistic learners in your classrooms, and they're all individuals, brilliant in their own ways. So starting off always with areas of strength, there's many areas of strength for our young people with autism. Punctuality is a big case. They're always on time. They like to be early if they can. Very, very good long-term memory. Once the thing goes into their brain and it gets processed, it never leaves them. And I'll come on to some of that when I get back to classroom strategies later in the session. They always have specialist areas of skills, and some I would touch on are lots of technical, creative, artistic, mathematical, scientific, great at building things, attention to detail, precision. One thing that I find working with the young people I do every day is they're extremely honest. It's a real quality. Sometimes can get them into a little bit of trouble sometimes, and sometimes they might be seen as too honest, if you can ever possibly be that. They need rules, they like rules, and they like routines. Responsiveness to explicit instructions, they follow instructions to the letter. Okay, really, sense of humour is a big thing that we find, and thinking in a very visual way. They're visual learners, most of them, and extremely creative. So what I would say is, if I was an employer, or you were an employer, would you not think that these were you would be extremely fortunate to find a candidate with these qualities? So this just touches on the surface of all the strengths that autistic young people have, and that's why I want to focus on it not being a deficit, but being a strength. Okay, I'm not saying that there's not challenges along the way, but there's also opportunities that come with that. So just moving on, just looking at the main areas of difference. So these would come the 4 aspects of autism, which are often overlapping for the young people in Braes. So you've got social interaction. Sometimes they have difficulties socially. Also with language and communication. With processing of information. A growing thing that we're noticing in Braes is the sensory sensitivity that young people have, especially to things like noise, and that ability for flexible thinking, which then has a knock-on their behaviour sometimes. So in terms of going through some of the differences, social interaction, young people with autism at Braes often have difficulties with this. Our school, wonderful place that it is, it's full of opportunities for socialising, and there are lots of demands for social interaction skills. This can be group work or social times like break or lunch or after school clubs. I would say that it's always best to adopt a gentle approach, encouraging approach when supporting young people with autism in this area. However, often they like their own company, and this makes them feel safe, and this should never be viewed as negative. We have lots of young people that come to our bases who just need a quiet space and they're happy in their own thoughts during lunches and breaks and things like that. So you can see by the slide there, many autistic young people don't understand different people's thoughts and feelings. It's a kind of lack of empathy for other people in terms of because they get caught up in what they think rather than what other people think. So this kind of leads them to kind of sometimes be on their own. So leads on to kind of, they also don't always understand non-verbal communication, so such as facial expressions, making eye contact, or even judging how close is acceptable to stand next to a person that you don't know. So this kind of forms part of a kind of lack of empathy for other people overall. So this can make the building of social relationships and sustaining social relationships difficult for autistic young people. So they may become socially isolated, and I put down that they can find group work challenging. And when I come back to strategies within the classroom, I'll have a focus on that. They also lack strategies for developing and sustaining friendships, and sometimes social interactions can cause them distress because of the demands that puts on them. They may be unaware of social rules and not be able to pick up things like social cues. So in terms of language and communication, they may struggle to understand rules of conversation. They may only be interested in talking about the things that they're interested in and don't see that other people's points of views or conversations are worth listening to. They may have a literal black and white interpretation of thinking. Within the English language, there is an extensive range of slang words and phrases, puns and paradoxes. That's kind of life in general. This can present as challenging for those with autism. I've been caught out many times using phrases like, "You've worked your socks off," and got a strange look coming back from the pupil. In terms of give and take, they don't always understand that conversations are a kind of two-way street. Although they show good expressive skills, they always don't understand the underlying language behind that, and they can become overwhelmed with auditory stimulation or information. But what's very clear is our young people require additional processing time, so that links in with their ASN needs, which I'll go into when we come back to classroom stuff. They often use repetitive language, or they even may speak in a different dialect or accent. So Miss King, for instance, she works with an S3 pupil who, when working down in the shore, will often speak in an American accent. It's just what makes him feel comfortable. So just having a little look at sensory issues, this is a growing phenomenon that we're finding in the school. Obviously, Brace High is a very busy place, and it can be noisy at times. So this can be an issue for some young people who suffer from that type of thing. I work with a young boy in S3 who wears headphones to try and block out the sound, but obviously that's not possible in some classes. So he needs to take some time out so he can just deregulate and come to a calm place, and then once he feels better, he can go back to class. So sensory overstimulation or overload may result in acting out behaviour. Some young people can get anxious, or their behaviour can change as a result of that overstimulation. They may only be able to attend to information from one sense at a time. They may be hypo or hyper in terms of in terms of touch or smell or things like that. So it can have an impact on their learning in some areas of the school. And I've got some sort of example, a touchy-feely kind of scenario. So sensory needs may be overwhelming and often are for some young people with autism. And sometimes they have difficulty being aware of their own sensitivity. So they're not always aware that that's what's happening, and they have to be supported within that. So we offer kind of support down within pupil support in our Shore area, which is a kind of autism-friendly base, which supports young people with autism to deregulate, and I'll come back on to that in a little minute. In terms of flexible thinking, most young people with autism work at a kind of concrete level, but have more difficulties when they're talking about abstract learning. When younger, possibly when they were younger children, they may have found it difficult to play imaginatively, or only were able to focus on one area of special interest, and that follows them throughout their lives. Our autistic young people have some special interests, some things that they're very interested in. For instance, I work with young people who've been interested in World War II. I've got a young boy in S4 who is obsessed by Dungeons and Dragons. Animals is a big one. I have a young person who's obsessed by horses. I wish sometimes if I was a horse, it would make a big bit of difference to how I could support her more effectively. This kind of provides them with a security and predictability. It makes them feel safe, and they like to talk about it a lot, and we encourage that. But obviously in classrooms that's more difficult, and I'll come back onto that a later date, but it's great at building relationships with a young person because they feel that you're investing in them. They often have difficulty transferring skills from one context to another, and often depend on rules. They find it difficult to understand why someone would ever break a rule, and this can cause them anxiety. Their thinking style can be perceived to be very black and white, with no shades of grey. However, like the autistic brain thinks in an absolute way, and that's got a lot of positives for the young people, but also there's some difficulties that they find it difficult to think in a contextual manner. So for instance, things like creative writing can be very challenging as it requires imagination, as young people find it difficult to think beyond the here and now. Routines are extremely important, and they provide autistic young people with predictability. And they need that in their daily lives, and they need that supported and fostered continuously. However, sometimes, as we know in school, lots of changes take place, and autistic young people find change extremely difficult. So, for instance, things like transitions to high school, timetable changes, or even unexpected changes in class, or if the teacher's off, can cause a young person with autism to become extremely anxious. So I would say a really good tip that I'll come back to when I talk about in-class support is prior warning or advance notice where possible is a huge thing. It's hugely beneficial for young people with autism. So organising, planning and sequencing, that is really quite challenging for some autistic young people. And when they often get into a habit of, not being able to do homework, planning ahead, and that's where a lot of classroom step-by-step support and steps from key teachers, pastoral heads is really important in trying to get the young person, through those barriers that they may face. Sometimes autistic young people get into a kind of tunnel focus, and they're only able to think about one thing at a time. And they often find it difficult to understand context. So unless they've directly experienced it in life, or they have seen it in a film or on a computer game, they often don't understand it. So, for instance, things like thinking about the future can be very problematic for autistic young people, as this involves thinking about what might happen, and that's something that they find difficult to imagine. So all of these things can lead to a kind of emotional response, and that can sometimes be a negative thing for the young people, where they might get anxious, or even suffer from depression. We might see things like meltdowns with tears and shouting. So that's a kind of emotional response. They may often try and run away from a situation, where they find difficult. So they just kind of switch off and say, enough's enough, I have to go. And we can support them through that in a variety of ways, down in pupil support, and also kind of stopping that from happening in the first place within the classroom. I think the sharing of information about young people with autism is something that I'm really passionate about improving, in terms of getting that information out to staff. So part of my practitioner inquiry is to create an autism profile for each young person with autism, to try and gather more information from their parents and guardians, and try and put that into a format to then get that out to staff to try and see the impact a positive way for young people. So sorry, I'm just digressing there. So they may become aggressive or self-abusive, often blame themselves for a lot of things that maybe they don't need to. They might overreact to situations, and they're unable to self-regulate. That sort of means bringing themselves back down to where they need to be to access their learning and carry on with their day. They may not be able to process information, but leads them to becoming anxious, and they need time to be able to calm down. So sometimes they may get too upset to listen to calming suggestions, and may need to spend some time with us to sort of support that and get them back in a calm place. Some of you may have seen some autistic young people self-stimming, behaviour like hand flapping, finger flicking, and kind of want to touch things all the time. But I suppose at the other end, what we're seeing more and more in Braes High is autistic young people, because they can't regulate their emotions, just going into shutdown mode. Sort of the idea that they can't carry on, so they need to take some time out in order to calm themselves down and get themselves back in a place that they can carry on. But a lot of it is related to fear. They don't understand why things are happening. They don't know why they're getting anxious, and they need a lot of support to kind of work through those. And it takes a considerable amount of time in order for them to do that. In extreme cases, it might lead to things like self-harming, and we do see that from time to time with young people with autism, that they're just not able to have that emotional intelligence to understand what's going on, and that can lead to a self-harm. But then they would always get support with that to work through these situations. Beginning to look at how we support young people in Braes High in terms of autistic young people. I was quite surprised to find out that on our CMIS system currently, there are only 16 young people who are categorised with an autism diagnosis. That's a lot lower than I expected it to be. However, you can see by the fact that there's 12 males and 4 females. This highlights that there is a gender imbalance, in terms that you've highlighted in your chat, that there's much more males being diagnosed than females. Simply put, autism up until very recently has been a male, a male kind of diagnosis. Very few females are ever diagnosed, and it takes up to 7 times longer for a female to get a diagnosis than a male. But hopefully things are beginning to change, and we see that in school now, that more and more young people, females especially, are coming across with the traits that we see in males. So I would say I've just been kind of working on this over the last few days, speaking to people, my colleagues, if we were to factor in the number of young people at Braes who are presenting with autistic traits, like difficulties with social communication, for example, I definitely feel the number of young people with autism would rise to 50 or 60, and that's probably a low estimate. So I've definitely seen in the years that I've been working in pupil support over the 5 or 6 years I've been here, there's been an explosion of young people showing autistic traits. Whether or not that's because of better sort of identification, or whether it's more in the public eye, I'm not too sure. But definitely, there's no question that year on year, the numbers of young people are growing. So I think it's really important to help support staff to get a better awareness of autism, and also to provide them with strategies to support our young people even more effectively, because I think that's something that's definitely going to grow and grow as we move on. Definitely, one thing that we are seeing, and Julie and Laura have expressed this to me as well during our practitioner inquiry group meeting, that they're seeing more and more young people, and definitely I'm seeing more and more girls who are presenting with autistic traits. So this usually comes to fruition at kind of the end of S1 or the start of S2. And thinking about that is possibly because, the demands become higher, they're unable to mask the things that are kind of in their heads going forward. And we're seeing that coming out, and more girls having emotional type difficulties that they fail to manage, they're struggling to manage. So that's definitely something that that we're seeing in Braes High moving forward. So just to kind of look at the overall support in the school, I thought it was important to sort of put out there what actually happens, and the processes involved in supporting young people with autism from a whole school perspective. So we do log children with a diagnosis of autism on CMIS, and most children with a diagnosis often have GIRFIC paperwork. That's mainly to update their plans to support them more effectively. That usually comes after a team around the child meeting, where professionals become involved and gather together to update on the child's progress, and to create a plan if things are maybe challenging or going wrong in places, to try and support them forward as they go through their school career. I've put down that children may be working with CAMHS. Some of our children get a diagnosis from CAMHS, and that's simply it. And then obviously from the school's perspective, we have to sort of pick that up and sort of support them through their school days, which can be extremely difficult at times. Some of the CAMHS services are providing other services, but it's not for every child, and it can become frustrating for families that they feel that they should be getting more support, but it kind of often falls to the school to provide that support. They often have a key teacher in pupil support. They may have support hours from the council. So what that means is we can apply for kind of hours from Falkirk Council, but that doesn't necessarily mean we can bring in another member of staff to support a young person or a group of young people. They may have SFLAs in their classrooms. So at the moment, we have one of our support for learning assistants kind of chaperoning one of our young autistic people in every class. And that works really well, and we wish we could do that for more young people, but unfortunately due to resources that's not possible. But it is a good short-term strategy for this young person who was having extreme difficulties. They will appear as a medical note on the quick guide, and they will always receive additional arrangements for their exams or for tests as they move through the school. They have a flag on OTB. They may be timetabled in the shore. We have several young people, timetabled here, but that's dependent on their plan and on the house team, etc. Some of our young people have input from Cheryl, who's very good and offers support and advice. We often discuss our autistic young people at house team meetings if they're having challenges or difficulties through the curriculum. They have regular pastoral support. We have regular review meetings with their parents and guardians to update them, and that's a really important point to make, that it's really important that we get an understanding of how the young people are at home, because that then has an impact on how they are in school. So it's a kind of support between home and school. And important information about young people is always logs on OTB. So I just wanted to kind of finish up by saying that we have developed the Shore base. So it's an autism-friendly base in the school. So it's a very calm, quiet, relaxing space for children with autism to deregulate when they're anxious or feel upset or having a particularly difficult day. It's not just used by young people with autism, it's used by a range of young people, but it's really autism friendly. You can see by the colours on the walls there, they were chosen to kind of make it a nice tranquil place. There's not a lot of stimulation in terms of posters on the walls, and it's a very calm, quiet and relaxing place. The pupils are timetabled by Miss King. That's in consultation with our house teams and a range of staff around the school. This is normally kind of for a short-term basis, but a few pupils have maybe 1 or 2 periods a week, which they use as a kind of deregulation downtime. But it's very important to say that it's a working room. All the pupils within the Shore are working on a particular activity, whether it's coursework, homework, whether it's being involved in a kind of play, a games-based situation. You can see on the table there's a Lego. Lego is very popular down here. And we also run a kind of therapy session on that, which the pupils, most of whom are autistic, really enjoy. But the theory behind that is getting kids together, and it also obviously supports them with their communication and their socialisation as well. The feedback from pupils is really, really positive, and I should also say from parents as well about the young people using the Shore. We never have an issue with kids coming down here. That they're always calm and collected and in a much better place when they leave. Staff from across the school volunteer. You might not be aware of that, to support pupils in the Shore. And I would say if you would like to be part of that, or you would like to come down for a visit, you're very welcome. So just to finish off, I would just say the training forms part of my long ongoing practitioner inquiry, which I've been doing for a number of years now. And I'd be really grateful if you would provide me with some feedback, either just by email or, if you pass me in the corridor, or just, have a wee chat or come down. So thanks for attending part 1, and I would really like you to come along to part 2 of the autism training, because that will be based around strategies within the classroom to support young people, and I'll be using some real life examples of how we can do that moving forward. Thank you.